Elvis's eyes locked onto a sign in the crowd and his knees started trembling. The music stopped. 30,000 people fell silent. The king of rock and roll was breaking down on stage. Las Vegas, August 1974. The International Hotel ballroom packed wall to wall. Elvis mid-performance, sweat glistening under spotlights, voice soaring through. How great thou art! Then his gaze drifted to the fifth row. A woman, holding a handmade cardboard sign. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words that would shatter the strongest man in entertainment. He stopped singing. Mid-note. The band kept playing for exactly 4 more bars before they realized something was wrong. Elvis's microphone dropped to his side. His chest heaved. And then, for the first time in his 20-year career, Elvis Presley began to cry in front of an audience. What was on that sign? What could possibly break a man who'd performed for presidents, survived the death of his mother, and carried the weight of being the world's biggest star? The answer will devastate you. But first, you need to understand how we got here. 6 hours earlier, Elvis had been in his suite, staring at himself in the mirror. The jumpsuit felt tighter than usual. His manager, Colonel Parker, had been pushing him harder. More shows, less rest, maximum profit. Elvis was exhausted. Not just physically. Spiritually. He'd been asking himself the same question for months. Does any of this matter anymore? The arena staff were setting up. Sound checks. Light adjustments. Standard procedure for another Elvis show. But something felt different that night. The air was heavy. Even the crew noticed it. Elvis seems off. One stagehand whispered to another. Like he's carrying something. Subscribe now and drop a comment because what happens next will change how you see Elvis Presley forever. In the 5th row, a woman named Sarah Henderson sat clutching a sign she'd made the night before. Her hands were shaking. She'd driven 14 hours from Denver with her sister. They'd saved for 6 months to afford these tickets. But Sarah wasn't here for entertainment. She was here for a miracle. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah's 9-year-old son Michael had been diagnosed with terminal leukemia. The doctors gave him 4 months. Maybe 6. Michael's room at St. Jude's Children's Hospital was covered in Elvis posters. Every night Sarah would play Love Me Tender on a small cassette player by his bed. It was the only thing that stopped Michael from crying. Mom, Michael had said one night, his small voice barely above a whisper. If I can't meet Elvis before I go, will you tell him I loved his music? Sarah had promised. She'd promised her dying son she would somehow get a message to Elvis Presley. So she made a sign. Simple cardboard. Black marker. 3 words. My son is dying. That's all it said. No explanation. No plea. Just a raw, desperate truth held up by a mother who'd run out of options. Elvis was 45 minutes into his set. He'd performed Suspicious Minds, Burning Love, and half a dozen other hits. The crowd was ecstatic. But Elvis felt hollow. He was going through the motions, hitting the notes, doing the moves. But something was missing. The connection. The purpose. The reason he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Then he saw it. Elvis stopped singing mid-word. The arena fell into death silence. Nobody moved. 30,000 people held their breath. His eyes had locked onto Sarah's sign. My son is dying. 4 words. Cardboard and marker. But they hit Elvis like a freight train. Because suddenly, he remembered why he'd started all of this. It wasn't for the money. It wasn't for the fame. It was to make people feel something. To give them hope when they had none. Elvis's hand went to his chest. His breathing became visible even from the back rows. The band had stopped playing. Joe Gercio, the conductor, was frozen, bat in midair, watching his boss unravel in real time. Where is she? Elvis's voice cracked into the microphone. The woman with the sign. Where is she? Security moved instantly. Sarah didn't want to stand up. She was terrified. Her sister grabbed her arm. Go. You promised Michael. Sarah stood, trembling, holding the sign above her head. Elvis pointed directly at her. Bring her up here. Right now. The crowd erupted. Some thought it was part of the show. Others sensed something real was happening. Security escorted Sarah through the crowd. She climbed the steps to the stage. Her legs barely worked. When she reached Elvis, he took both her hands in his. Tell me about your son, he said. The microphone wasn't even near his mouth. This wasn't for the audience. This was between them. Sarah's voice broke. His name is Michael. He's 9. He has leukemia. The doctors say 4 months. Maybe less. Tears streamed down her face. He loves you more than anything in this world. He asked me to tell you that your music is the only thing that makes him smile anymore. Elvis closed his eyes. His jaw clenched. When he opened them again, tears were running down his face, cutting lines through his stage makeup. The king of rock and roll was crying in front of 30,000 people, and he didn't care. What's his favorite song? Elvis asked. Love Me Tender, Sarah whispered. Elvis turned to the band. Love Me Tender. From the top. And I want every light in this place on her while I sing it. The spotlight shifted. Sarah was bathed in light on the biggest stage in Las Vegas. Elvis took the microphone and began to sing. But this wasn't a performance. This was a prayer. Every word dripped with emotion. Every note was for Michael Henderson, a dying boy in a hospital room in Denver who would never get to attend an Elvis concert. But here's the part nobody expected. The part that would become legendary. Halfway through the second verse, Elvis reached up and took off the scarf he was wearing. It was silk, custom made, one of his signature pieces. He'd worn it on album covers. It was worth thousands. He placed it in Sarah's hands and closed her fingers around it. You give this to Michael, Elvis said, his voice breaking. You tell him Elvis Presley says he's the bravest person I've ever known. You tell him he's stronger than any man I've ever met. And you tell him... Elvis paused, fighting to keep his composure. You tell him I'll be praying for him every single night. The arena erupted. But it wasn't applause for a show. It was collective catharsis. 30,000 people watching a superstar become human. Watching the king remember he was just a man who'd once been a poor kid from Tupelo, Mississippi, who knew what it felt like to hurt. Elvis finished the song. Sarah was sobbing. The audience was sobbing. Even the band members were wiping their eyes. When the final note faded, Elvis hugged Sarah. Not a celebrity hug. A real embrace. The kind you give someone when words aren't enough. Go be with your son, Elvis whispered in her ear. And tell him Elvis loves him. Security escorted Sarah off stage. Elvis turned back to the audience. He couldn't speak for a full minute. Just stood there, breathing, processing, feeling everything at once. When he finally found his voice, all he said was, "Sometimes we forget what this is all about. Thank you for reminding me." Share this story and subscribe because what happened next is even more unbelievable. Sarah Henderson drove through the night. 14 hours straight back to Denver. She arrived at St. Jude's at dawn. Michael was asleep. Sarah gently placed Elvis's scarf on the bed next to him. When Michael woke up and saw it, his eyes went wide. "Mom, is this real? Is this really his?" "It's real, baby. Elvis sang for you last night. In front of 30,000 people. And he wanted you to have this." Michael held that scarf like it was made of gold. He slept with it every night. The nurses said his demeanor changed. He smiled more. He fought harder. The doctors couldn't explain it, but Michael's condition stabilized. Not cured, but stable. He lived not 4 months, but 11. 11 months that the doctors said were medically improbable. The scarf never left his side. When Michael finally passed away in July 1975, he was holding it. Sarah kept it after he died. It still smelled faintly of Elvis's cologne. She framed it with a photo of Michael and the sign she'd held up that night. It hung in her living room until the day she died in 2019. But the story doesn't end there. Elvis never spoke publicly about what happened that night. He didn't use it for publicity. Didn't mention it in interviews. But those close to him said it changed him. His assistant, Charlie Hodge, said Elvis started doing something after that night that he'd never done before. Before every show, he'd ask the venue staff if there were any sick kids in the audience. If there were, he'd always find a way to acknowledge them. A wave. A pointed song. Sometimes he'd bring them backstage. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager, said, "After the Sarah Henderson moment, Elvis remembered why he got into this business. It wasn't about the Colonel's deals or the box office numbers. It was about connection. About making people feel less alone." In 1976, a year before his death, Elvis established an anonymous fund through his attorney. It provided financial assistance to families dealing with pediatric cancer. The fund still exists today. Most people don't know Elvis created it. That's how he wanted it. The scarf Sarah Henderson held that night has been displayed at the Elvis Presley Museum in Memphis since 2020. Next to it is the sign, "My son is dying," and a photo of Michael, smiling, holding the scarf just days before he passed. The placard reads, "The night the king remembered why he wore the crown." But perhaps the most powerful part of this story is what Elvis wrote in his journal the night after that concert. His personal diary was sealed for decades after his death, but in 2018, excerpts were published. The entry from August 1974 reads, "Tonight I remembered what Mama used to tell me. She said, 'Elvis, the Lord gave you a voice not to make you rich or famous. He gave it to you so you could reach people when they're hurting most. That's your real job, son.' I forgot that. For too long. But tonight, a woman named Sarah reminded me. I don't know if I've done enough good in my life, but I know tonight mattered. Tonight was real. And if that's all I'm remembered for, I'd be okay with that." Elvis Presley died 3 years later, on August 16, 1977. When the news broke, Sarah Henderson was among the millions who mourned. But her grief was different. She didn't mourn a celebrity. She mourned a man who'd given her son 11 extra months of smiles. A man who'd proven that even at the absolute peak of fame, kindness still matters most. Today, Sarah's daughter Emily runs a foundation called Michael's Song. It provides music therapy to children in cancer wards across America. On the wall of their Denver office hangs a replica of the sign Sarah held up that night, along with these words, "One moment of compassion can echo forever." The scarf Elvis gave Michael has been estimated to be worth over $250,000 at auction. Sarah was offered that amount multiple times. She refused every offer. "That scarf isn't worth money," she'd say. "It's worth a mother keeping a promise to her son. And that's priceless." Every August, on the anniversary of that concert, the International Hotel, now the Westgate, in Las Vegas holds a moment of silence in the ballroom where it happened. Staff members place a single white scarf on the stage. No announcement. No ceremony. Just a quiet reminder that 50 years ago, the biggest star in the world stopped his show to honor the smallest voice in the crowd. Musicians who knew Elvis say the story inspired them. Bruce Springsteen said in a 2010 interview, "When I heard about what Elvis did for that mother and her son, it changed how I approach my concerts. I realized we're not just entertainers. We're temporary relief for people carrying weights we can't see." That's the legacy of that moment. Not the music. Not the fame. Not the sold-out arenas. It's the reminder that the truest measure of a man isn't how high he rises, but how often he bends down to lift others. Share this story. Subscribe to never miss these forgotten moments. Because in a world that worships success, sometimes we need to be reminded that compassion is the only currency that truly matters. Elvis Presley stopped his show on a summer night in 1974 because a mother held up a sign. That sign broke through the armor of fame, the numbness of routine, and the exhaustion of being the king. It reminded him who he'd been before the world knew his name, a poor kid from Mississippi who just wanted to make people feel something beautiful. The music stopped. The king cried. And 30,000 people witnessed what real greatness looks like, choosing to be human when the world expects you to be a god.